I think we'll look back at this period like we look back to the period where people were discovering fundamental physics. I think the fact that we're discovering how to predict the intelligence of a trained AI before we start training it, and that there is something close to a natural law here, and we can predictably say this much compute, this big of a neural network, this training data, this will be the capabilities of the model. Now, we can predict how it'll score on some tests. What we're really interested in is, can we predict the qualitative new things, just the new capabilities that didn't exist at all in GPT-4 that do exist in future versions like GPT-5. That seems important to figure out. But right now we can say, here's how we predict it'll do on this eval or this metric. And I really do think we'll look back at this like we were all living through one of the most important periods of human discovery. I think this will be that big of a deal. In terms of how we think about when we go beyond human intelligence, and I don't think that's quite the right framework because it'll happen in some areas and not others. Already these systems are superhuman in some limited areas and extremely bad in others. And I think that's fine. I think everybody's going to be the CEO of all of the work they want to do, and they'll have tons of people that they're able to coordinate and direct and sort of provide the taste and the feedback on. But they'll have lots of agents, for lack of a better word, that go off and do increasingly complex tasks. I think it's going to feel like this gradual thing. It's these AIs join society. They join the workforce. It's not even like we feel like any one instant, any single AI is way more powerful than a human. We haven't made a decision. We don't even make a decision there. It's that we have 8 billion humans and we have 8 billion AI workers that kind of just exist in society and give us all a lot of leverage. We, not OpenAI, but we the field, we humanity, it's been this culmination. I think we should be collectively as proud of this as we were for the moon landing. After decades, centuries of scientific and technological progress, we have figured out a computer algorithm that can really, truly, no tricks, no sleight of hand, it can actually learn, as you saw in that. And we can argue about what the definition of learn means, but it's enough that it's useful. And it's enough that it's fulfilling this role for all of these people. And it gets predictably better with scale. So those are two things taken together that are a profound thing for what's going to happen in the coming decade for humanity. I think it's going to be fantastic. I think we're already seeing how people are using this to learn new skills, to deliver sort of all sorts of new creative services. Just got to meet with a bunch of people building on it in Toronto. But this is going to be a very different world. And if you look at the progress from even before GPT-3, which Toby just mentioned, but GPT-2 in 2019, people tried it and said, this is like a dead-end direction. Scaled it up, GPT-3, people were like, oh, okay. GPT 3.5 was finally usable. And GPT-4, people are building entire companies around. GPT 5, 6, and 7, I think will continue in future years on this trajectory of really increasing the utility they can provide. And this is a big, new, exciting thing to have in the world. We weren't quite sure how the world was going to respond to ChatGPT. There were a lot of different opinions inside the company. We knew it was good. We wanted to release it because we thought it was good. We had already had GPT-4 at that point for many months, so we'd gotten used to something much better. We released ChatGPT with GPT 3.5, and part of the reason that we decided we wanted to release it was realizing that part of our mission requires us to deploy these things gradually. We want people to get used to the systems. We want people to have time to adapt, to think about it, to give us feedback, to decide what rules and regulation we want in society. And so we were like, well, we'll put this thing out. People will like it. It's pretty good. But we certainly didn't think it was going to be sort of the phenomenon that it turned out to be. We thought that would come when we released GPT-4 several months later. So we, woke up that morning, like we'd released many other products, and put it out there, and we were like, we hope people like it. And by, I would say, 2 o'clock that afternoon, it was clear that something big was about to happen. It wasn't clear exactly how big, because you can kind of you always start with the tech hyper early adopter crew, but they were so excited about it. They were telling their friends and that morning. And then by that afternoon, I was starting to hear from people who don't normally follow tech, which is like, I saw this thing, it sounds wild, like, can you let me try it out? Or how do I do this? By the 5th day, we had gotten 1 million users. It kept going from there. But definitely that day, it was like, so before running OpenAI, I ran this thing called Y Combinator, which helps people, we give startup advice. And I used to sit there and tell people, if you don't have a viral loop, if you don't have some sharing functionality, if you don't have something social, if you don't have a network effect, it is definitely not going to work. And I feel very bad now, because I clearly gave some bad advice. But no, we had none of that. We put it out. We put it out like not expecting this speed of, well, no one would expect the speed of growth because it hadn't happened, but we did not expect it. I think we have lost our collective sense of optimism about the future. For good reason in some cases, but I think all of us should act as our duty to bring that back. I think we have lost a belief that the future can be radically better than the current world. I think a lot of people assume it's going to be worse, again, for good reason. The only way that I know to return to that sense of optimism and that sense of growth is to use technology to create abundance. This works. This is like a long-term sustainable strategy. As far as the systems that enable that, like the social systems, liberal democratic values, the governments we have in much of the world today, they enable the scientific and technological progress, but that is the only thing that drives real sustainable long-term economic growth. And if you don't have that, the future does not get better. And I think we have lost a belief that we can still do that. We had a great run in society for maybe 150 years, and then it kind of ended a few decades ago, and it's been hard to get it back. But technology that can deliver abundance, the technology that can deliver like a lot higher bar for quality of life. I think AI is one of these big ones. Energy is another. The stuff that's happening right now with bio is amazing. There will still be a lot of, seems like very human nature to worry a lot about the future and to sort of feel a little bit zero sum. But the more we can get out of that, the more we can just say like, hey, there's going to be plenty to go around. The pie is going to get much bigger every year. Every year is going to be like dramatically better than the year before. And looking at technology as the only vector to solve that, and is the sort of like moral obligation of all of us to push forward, I think that's the path forward. The version of this I think about the most is AI, but I've heard about this in other technologies too, and I think pretty compelling answers. One of the things that is powerful about this sort of chat interface of ChatGPT is that small children can use it, old people can use it, people who are very uncomfortable with technology can use it, people that have a $20 Android phone can use it and get access to the same thing. I think it's a fundamentally equalizing technology in a way that not everything has been. Look, I think it's so tempting to over-anthropomorphize this. It is so fun. And I actually think that's one of the good parts about this is technology has not been that fun for a while. It has not felt like a new sort of frontier, and this is like fun, and it's certainly a new frontier. But it's very tempting to anthropomorphize it. And I think we have to like figure out a way to still have the fun, but remind people that this is a tool and not a creature. But as a kind of really powerful interactive tool, it is totally fun to sit there and explore the edges of it. A lot of people have done that. There's a real talent for people who are good at this, and they found amazing, amazing things in a lot of them. I remember, speaking of like early on in those first few days, I was like sitting at home late one night, kind of like catching up on reading the internet. But it was just incredible what people were doing and what people were finding, and the kind of creative power of humanity that these tools are that already are unleashing. It's wild to watch. When the AI systems can either semi-autonomously or just by helping us a lot really discover new science. Mm-hmm. And if the rate of scientific progress that humanity makes increases by a factor of 10 or 100 or 1,000 in a year, that somehow feels different than just a bunch more remote employees. If you look at the prediction from maybe 10 years ago, maybe even 5, I think most experts would have said, first AI comes for physical labor. It's going to drive trucks, it's going to work in factories. Then it comes from the sort of easier parts of cognitive labor. Then it comes from the stuff that's really hard. Maybe it can be, maybe it can write computer code someday, maybe not. And then maybe someday in the distant future, but probably never, it can do creative work. And of course, it's gone the exact opposite direction. almost everybody predicted this wrong. But the fact that it can do this sort of creativity and the fact that it can use code to verify things actually gives me hope that we may have an AI that can do science before we have that factory robot that we can do everything else.
And what else is out there? Like, what else are the experiences that children go through, which would be amazing to expose to these models to make them more human-like?
So I do think coding is pretty special. Coding has some nice structure to it. You can run the code, like an AI agent can run the code and look at the output and sort of say, this is right, this is wrong. There's like debugging messages along the way. There are a lot of things about coding that I think are a particularly great modality to train these models on. But that won't be, of course, the last thing we train on. I'm very excited to see what happens when we can really do video. Yeah. There's a lot of video content in the world. There's a lot of things that are, I think, much easier to learn with video than text. There's a huge debate in the field about whether a language model can get all the way to AGI. Can you represent everything that you need to know in language? Is language sufficient, or do you have to have video? I personally think it's a dumb question because it probably is possible, but the fastest way to get there, the easiest way to get there will be to have these other representations like video in these models as well. Again, like text is not the best for everything, even if it's capable of representing everything. Fundamentally, these models are just sort of like bits of data in, bits of data out, and it turns out you can represent a lot that way, but we should still try to figure out the best representations.